booties for black girl nerds.
Hello, how are you
Hey,
guys? Hey,
good. We're good. We're good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. Bear with me. I'm getting over this cold. I just got back from Sundance and the Park
Oh,
City weather got the best of me.
it'd be
Um,
like
so
that. Hmm.
so sorry if I'm hard to understand. But it's a pleasure to talk to both of you guys. I want to start with you, Kelvin. I noticed a distinct cadence and tone in your voice and accent as you played Martin in this series. What was your process as you were shaping your voice to sound like his?
Um, I started with the speeches and I was like, okay, what is the voice that we know? And I was like, okay, that's the voice we know. I took my work with my dialect coach and we broke those down phonetically and we tried to mark where does he breathe and where are the inflections and what's the intonation and what are the stressed vowels from him and what is he trying to convey? And we really did. It basically was like script work, but for dialect only. And what intentions was he experiencing and the emotions behind it based on my interpretation. Then I was like, okay, but what does he sound like at home? Because a lot of this show is about these private moments. So there was a whole other exercise of like, okay, how many clips can we find from the documentaries or from interviews? Or I found these interesting phone calls between him and LBJ, and he had a slightly different voice. And I was like, well, how do I take that voice? What is the more casual, colloquial, personal tone of voice that he uses in just in passing? And we worked on that for a while. And so then we took touchstones from the different types of Dr. King's voices. Also, there was a book that had his report card, and he did a performance class in seminary school. So then I knew that the preacher voice was crafted. So I was like, okay, with all this information, let's come up with a presentational voice, an at-home voice, and then there's the different years and what are the circumstances that surround it. This is so specific and boring. I'm sorry, but that is like,
No, look, we're Black girl nerds. So
okay.
this
Yes,
is
yes, that's what's
our
up. That's what I up. I love
yeah.
that.
Yeah, this is what we live for. So I love that. I love that it is so like micro in that way. And Aaron, for you, I'm sure as you were researching and prepping for this role, you learned a lot about Malcolm X. Was there anything that you learned about him that you didn't know before taking on this role?
I think honestly, it's what we are aware of is we're aware of the speech moments. We're aware of the moments where they were public facing. And I think for me, it was really a blessing and a privilege to have the opportunity to do a deep dive into his personal life and his personal relationships and his deep reverence and love and connection with his wife, Dr. Betty Shabazz, the tremendous role she played in his life. It's impossible to show up in the way Malcolm X did without having a woman like Dr. Betty Shabazz by your side. It's not possible. It's impossible. She provided him with strength. She provided him with guidance. She provided him with direction. She provided him with love. She provided him with reassurance in those moments where he's feeling, I imagine, insecure, unsure, and ready to sit down and stop. She said, no, we have a job to do. Let's go. You know what I mean? So I think it's really important that we have the opportunity to shine this bright and powerful light on the women in these remarkable men's lives, because their role is equally as important.
Kelvin, did you have any conversations with any of Martin's descendants and relatives as you were prepping for this role?
Unfortunately, I didn't. I think there were a number of historians that were well researched and did have relationships with them, and also from that period of time that did work on the show and part of the writing, but I didn't get a chance to connect with any of them. So yeah.
Well, listen, both of you guys did a spectacular job with this series. I can't wait for everybody else to see it. I wish there was so much more that I could ask, but they are giving me the wrap. Thank you so, so much for taking the time to talk to Black Girl Nerds. It's an honor and privilege to speak to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you
You
so
as
much.
well.
We
Thank
appreciate
you.
you. Get well.
Thank you, ladies, so much for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, hello, hello. How are you?
Good, good. Weruche, I want to start with you. I felt like this series finally digs a bit deeper into Martin and Coretta's relationship in a way that we quite haven't seen before. Who do you think grounds the relationship? Does Coretta keep Martin grounded, or does Martin do that for Coretta?
Ooh.
I think it's mutual.
Mm.
If you learn about the history of how they met and whatever, Martin was the man about town, great orator, everyone knew about him, and Coretta wasn't actually interested in him to start off with. So he just happened to be so charming and so dedicated to figuring out what he was on this earth to do, and I guess she found some sort of connection with that. I definitely would say it's a mutual thing. I think they're equal partners. I think they're equally yoked. Because they helped each other bring out the best in each other. I remember part of this in the show, there's a line where she says she wants to sing, and Martin says, and I'm going to be there cheering you on. Like, what do you mean? I'm going to be there for you. And the same way she always had his back every single time, because I guess they both understood that they were both coming together for a greater cause, not just husband and wife, not just lovers, but for the good of mankind, I guess. Oh, that sounds so grand. But, they knew they had to be together. They both recognized they had to be together for a higher purpose. And I think they did a fantastic job at achieving what they did.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that. Jayme, over to you. Betty seems to see more of who Malcolm is than how he really sees himself. Is that a fair assessment of who she is?
I love that. I love that phrasing. I'd say so. I think, one of the fascinating things that about her when researching, the first meeting, the first time seeing Malcolm, and her initial thought, it wasn't so much, her initial thought was, ooh, he fine, right? Then the second thought was, he looks like he needs someone to take care of him. And I remember reading that and it like sticking to me because she could really see him. She didn't just see the great orator. She didn't just see the great, the man of the movement or the leader or all this power. She saw through and past all of that and could see what he needed and what was missing. In a way that, like you said, he didn't often see in himself. I think without Betty, he wouldn't have really had the longevity that he had and the pacing, and keeping up at the pace that he did. Because she would often get after him about taking care of himself and creating space to just eat at times, right? So you can keep up with the movement that you're leading. So for sure, she saw something in him that he definitely at times missed for himself.
Coretta Scott King has been on everybody's radar these days for interesting reasons. But she's obviously made an impact on a lot of people today. Why do you think that she's resonated with so many people throughout the years?
Because I think she never stood by and was a side figure. She was present and very relevant, I think, in a movement for social justice. A lot of people don't know that she had been involved in activist movements and organizing while she was in college. Right before she got married, she'd also always been involved in stuff in the political sphere. And only when being with Martin did it only get amplified. And so even after Martin was taken from her, she carried on the work. The race didn't stop, it continued. And so she carried on and has done things, being involved in policy making and all sorts. So she carried on the work. So it transcends even just being a wife. She's a person in herself, and she achieved so much personally as a woman, as an activist, as a mother, and so many other things. And so I think the idea of a woman who has achieved as much as she achieved is encouraging, and is what I would say definitely myself as a young woman, look up to and aspire to be like her as well, to making my own mark on the world, as well as having a a family and other accolades and, you know, all those things. But definitely a woman who has made her mark on the world, even though she's not here, her legacy lives on.
Mm-hmm.
They're giving me the wrap. I really had so many more questions to ask, truly, truly, because you guys really played these roles with such nuance and such grace that I learned so much about these women, where I just want to deep dive into more of their history. So thank you for your work, and thank you for taking the time to talk to Black Girl Nerds. I really appreciate it, and all the best to you on this series. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jayme Broadnax, Black Girl Nerds. Hi,
up,
Gina.
Jayme?
Hi, Reggie.
How you doing? How are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, you know we love Black Girl Nerds.
Love you.
And we love you. We always love supporting your projects and bigging you guys up. And I absolutely love seeing this one. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Gina, I want to start with you. The pilot episode shows us this narrative parallel between Malcolm and Martin that clearly indicates that their formative years makes them seem like they're more of the same than they are different. What was the intention behind the storytelling there?
You really nailed it on the head. That was our intention. It was exciting for us to go into this project knowing that we could focus on both men and both women, but understanding that so often we're told we need to choose between Martin or Malcolm and who you're going to follow. But what we felt is that both men were really just two sides of the same coin. They both had the same goal. They were just going after it a little differently. And so we wanted to put forth that narrative and parallel those stories. The surprising thing for us is as we got into the research and the think tank, we were more and more surprised at how much their personal lives paralleled as well. The fact that as younger kids, they're, you know, the influence of their fathers, both their fathers being activists and larger than life figures, the racist incidents that they had to go through that fueled them as well. And then their paths certainly, and their love stories and how beautiful those were and how important those were to their formative years as well. So it was exciting to do that. And we felt it was something different to do in telling this narrative.
And it was done so well. Reggie, for you, the story, it's inspired by Jeff Stetson's The Meeting and the book, The Sword and the Shield. What specifically about those readings made it important for you to adapt them into this series?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It was inspired by many events, but clearly in the 80s, you know, the seminal piece of work, The Meeting, written by Jeff Stetson, was just such a brilliant piece. It was a fictional meeting actually, about Dr. King and Malcolm X, and they meet in a hotel. But it really also laid out this idea that it's not Malcolm or Martin, but it's Malcolm and Martin. The Sword and the Shield, a really great book written by Peniel Joseph, is just a real great North Star for the series that also just showed us two sides of the same coin. But also in the 80s, Mandela visited the United States. He came to Harlem. I was there, tons and crowds of people. Somehow I got to be like in the third row. And one of the things that always haunted me was seeing Betty Shabazz meet Winnie Mandela for the first time. Somebody introduced them. They ran across the stage. They hugged each other. They cried like they were long lost sisters. And it's just something that always stayed with me. So as a result, when Nat Geo came to us and they said, hey, do you want to do a narrative season 4 of Genius on Dr. King, it was very accessible and within reach for us to say you don't get to have Martin without Malcolm based on all of these experiences and the readings. And so that's really, you know, much of what inspired us to take this on.
Gina, Malcolm and Martin are two of the most iconic men in history, and many of us know about these men and their history. I mean, their lives are storied all over the place. Did you learn anything new about them through the process of creating this?
A tremendous amount. And that's what was exciting as well, that yes, there have been movies and books written about them. How were we going to approach it a little differently? And before a word was written, we had put together a think tank along with one of our exec producers, Francie Calfo, and it was made up of incredible scholars and journalists and thought leaders, religious leaders, activists, people who knew the big four, as we call them. And so to sit in that, it was 8 hours a day for over a week of listening to these people talk and debate and teach us so much. Ambassador Shabazz was one of our consultants as well, Malcolm's daughter. We were learning so much that we didn't even know. And not only about the iconic moments and historical moments, but what was going beyond those moments. Who were they as husbands and fathers and wives and mothers and sisters and daughters, like that humanity that we were gaining, that just made us excited to be able to put these things out in the world that people didn't know about. And there's so many things that we're excited for an audience to watch and say, I didn't know that about them. I think, I hope that's what's different about what we're doing.
Absolutely. Reggie, this series, Genius, is inspired by true events. Is that to say that there are some creative liberties? Because whenever you see inspired by, it kind of denotes that there may be some creative liberties taken. So is that something that we'll expect to see in this series, that there's going to be more information that's added to Malcolm and Martin's story?
Sure. I mean, for example, let's take like Martin and Coretta's, wedding night. Like we know where their honeymoon was, and so when we write that scene, there's some interpretation based on, the real life events. And so they are, this is not a documentary. This is a interpretation. It's a portrayal based on real life events. And, you just sort of, as artists, you uncover, you discover. And that's really what we look to do.
Gina, the music on this series, it felt like a supporting character to me. How important was it to make the music be used as a tool for storytelling?
I mean, I think if you look at all our work, we love songs for score. We love the impact that music can have on the way that you view something or feel something. For us, it was really important that in telling this narrative that people didn't just see it as something happening in the past. We like to use the word museum piece. We wanted to feel contemporary. And a lot of our music, we have original songs, we have artists, contemporary artists that actually sound like they're from the past. And then we have incredible artists like Thames and Jennifer Hudson. And those contemporary songs allow you to watch this, and though it's taking place in the past, feel as if it's happening in this moment, the importance of it happening in this moment and connecting with this story and this narrative and these characters in this moment.
Gina, Reggie, always a pleasure to speak with you. We always love the projects that you bring. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Black Girl Nerds, and all the best to you in this premiere.
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Jayme.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Damione. Hi, Raphael. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well. Damione, I'll start with you. Critics are immediately going to say, why do we need another Malcolm and Martin documentary? What makes this series different from what we've seen before? And what do you have to say to those critics?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I think the first thing that I would say is we hope that this is the first time we're seeing a story that not only illuminates more about who these two men were as people, but actually brings the two of them together. Most oftentimes, Martin and Malcolm are depicted as rivals. You have to pick a side. You got to be Team Martin. You got to be Team Malcolm. And so what we hope this series illuminates for everybody who watches it is not only an entertaining, interesting story, but also a little bit of an illumination into people we think we know, but we actually don't know as much as we think about. And for us, was the goal of when we came on board. It was the reason why we picked the parts of the stories that we did to talk about, because we are always interested, Raphael and I, in the moments before the moments. So we could have done a story just about the March on Washington or the by any means necessary quote. But why did these two men say those things? What was happening in their lives that brought them to that point? And how can we show two of America's greatest leaders in a different way? And that was what I would say to critics. I hope they would listen. But that's the approach that we would try to bring to, is what we tried to bring to this particular telling of these two men at this time.
I love that. The moments before the moments. Raphael, over to you. Telling these two men's stories, do you feel a sense of responsibility in how it will be interpreted by audiences and that your vision will be effective in the way that you guys had hoped to translate it onto the screen?
Absolutely. And I think we take pride in that responsibility, because it's now more than ever, it's apparent in our world that, more than anything, subject matter and icons such as Martin and Malcolm and their wives as well, Coretta and Betty, need to be told. And if, we can look back at our past and gain some knowledge of how we can actually achieve equality, I think it can only help our society as a whole. So for us, it's definitely a big responsibility, but one, we were humbled to have the opportunity to actually do.
Damione, what was the most challenging part of crafting this series together?
Oh, that's easy. We had 8 hours to tell 4 stories, because for us, while it is Genius MLK X, Betty and Coretta were our ones on the call sheet as well. And we were greedy. We wanted to tell as much as we could about all 4 of them, not just the big moments, but again, their origin stories, what their fears were, what their loves were. We purposely, with the Bythewoods, set out to cast this show in their early 20s because we wanted the audience to get to know these two men and Betty and Coretta as they were. They unfortunately both passed away at the age of 39, so they never got to see 40. So for us, we wanted to pack as much as we could in about all 4 of them, and we could have used 60 more episodes to do so. We feel very proud about what we got to get in, but the challenging thing was picking what to show and what not to show, as it made sense in the thematic storyline that we were trying to tell. But I'll still take, 10 more seasons if they'll give it to us to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm hoping for that as well, because it was so good, and I really wanted to see more as the series had ended. There's a lot that we already know. Raphael, back to you. There's a lot that we already know about Malcolm and Martin's story. What do you think will surprise viewers most about this series?
That's a great question. Hopefully what will surprise viewers, is them being able to relate to who they were as just people, because a lot of times, again, we know them as the civil rights icons that they are, but the beauty behind digging into their story is that we can see how they were as husbands, how they were as brothers and sisters, how they were as fathers, the love that, just from a pure human standpoint, we can all relate to. Hopefully the audience can really dig into those stories. Again, it's the moments in between the moments that we really want to kind of dig into. And so just from a humanistic standpoint, hopefully the audience can learn more about these icons, but also see something within themselves, within whether it be Martin, Malcolm, Coretta, or Betty. They can find different parts that, they can really relate to.
Damione, is there anything that you learned about MLK or Malcolm or both of these men while working on this project?
Oh, yeah. I've said it. I have a history degree, and I came into this quite confident that I knew a lot about these 4 people. And very early on in our research, I was humbled to learn that I did not. And like Raphael said, one of the exciting things for us is we want the audience to have that same emotion 8 times. Over 8 episodes, we hope that there will be one part of this story where they go, I did not know that about Martin. I did not know that about Malcolm, whether it's the suicide attempt in the pilot, the near-death stabbing that he has that happens in hour 4. Coretta's background as an opera singer. Dr. Betty Shabazz was a nurse. That Malcolm suffered from mental illness. That all of those things were eye-popping moments for me that as a storyteller in television, crafting an 8-hour series and having these tent poles to chase worked perfectly for us. But also we want our audience to walk away going, I didn't know Martin and Malcolm loved ice cream as much as they did. And that kind of thing is really, really fun. Because to Raph's point, it humanizes them in a way that we can see ourselves and go, I can do what they did. They're not just the people on the t-shirts. They're like everybody on my block. They just took all of those great God-given gifts and they channeled it into doing something iconic. And so that was the biggest thing for myself, was learning that they did it. Why can't we do it?
Well said. I just love how this series shows that both of these men are more of the same than they were different. And I really appreciate how you've crafted these stories together in this series. I can't wait for everyone to see it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Black Girl Nerds, and all the best to you in the premiere.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure meeting.
Nice to meet you.
Better shake your booties for Black Girl Nerds. Better shake your booties for Black Girl Nerds.